This week's episode is brought to you with the support of Bureau Veritas.
At Bureau Veritas, each and every one of us is by your side to help you navigate your decarbonisation journey and shape a better maritime world.
This is Green Seas, the podcast by Tradewinds about sustainability and the business of the ocean. I'm Eric Priante Martin, and today we're on a visit to Texas to find out why clean fuel projects are in the slow lane.
You try. Just make sure you get the right one.
This is the White House, just over 2 years ago. President Joe Biden is signing the Inflation Reduction Act. Despite its name, the law was praised for, among other things, pumping money into clean fuels production for shipping and other industries.
There you go. It's now law.
But as I recently visited Texas, where many clean fuels production projects are proposed, I found a fog of regulatory uncertainty has slowed some projects and put others on the shelf. At the heart of the problem is the regulatory guidance that the Biden administration needs to provide to implement the Inflation Reduction Act with its tax credits for green fuel production. Many of the green fuels that shipping would benefit from are derivatives of hydrogen, which can be zero emissions when produced from renewable electricity. But would-be green fuel producers are waiting for the U.S. Treasury Department to provide guidance for what qualifies for the so-called 45V tax credits for green hydrogen. Some projects are also waiting for information about another tax credit, 45Q, which would support carbon capture. That guidance has taken longer than expected, impacting projects that would produce hydrogen derivatives like green methanol and ammonia. In the U.S. Gulf Coast, particularly here in Texas, the Inflation Reduction Act led to excitement that the region could become a center for green fuels production. That's thanks to existing infrastructure, a community of energy companies, and supportive state governments. Jeff Pollack is Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer at the Port of Corpus Christi. He said the region is well positioned to provide decarbonized molecules for markets in Europe and Asia, with trade routes that look much like what we see today for U.S. exports of fossil fuels from the region. But he said the drive by startups to build projects to produce those fuels has been chilled by the uncertainty around the tax credit guidance.
The fact that it's going to be hard for anyone who's using grid-supplied electrons to get the full, if any, of the 45V production tax credit, at least it's currently structured, unfortunately had this chilling effect on that startup sector in the merchant hydrogen space.
Gregory Dolan is Chief Executive of the Methanol Institute.
We're the trade association for the global methanol industry, so we have 100 members representing the world's leading methanol producers, distributors, technology companies, and now vessel owners.
He said that with the U.S. Gulf Coast already a major hub for producing methanol, many in that space are looking to invest in technologies to increase production of the green version of that fuel.
One of the things that will help determine the pace of growth of renewable methanol in particular is what happens with the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the tax credits that we expect to see under the IRA. In particular, the 45V clean hydrogen tax credit, which we think will be really important for methanol. The issue now is we still don't have final guidance from the U.S. Treasury Department. So while there's a lot of talk about these IRA tax credits, particularly for hydrogen, we're still waiting on final guidance. So there's still a lot of investment sitting on the sidelines, waiting for those tax credits to become fully effective.
He said that some projects will continue to move forward without the Treasury guidance, including those producing methanol from biological waste rather than from renewable electricity. But others need to know what will qualify for the tax credits before they can press ahead. One company that can press ahead is Oberon Fuels, which has a pipeline of projects to produce dimethyl ether and methanol from biological sources, with multiple end-user industries in mind. Treasury has provided guidance for biofuels. Oberon Chief Executive Rebecca Boudreaux said the Inflation Reduction Act provides a powerful incentive for green fuel production. And she said each individual tax credit has its own uncertainties.
It's about how do you leverage these very lucrative incentives that can help push production forward for very low carbon intensity fuels in the wake of uncertainty. So each credit has its own uncertainty, But that's where we come back as a company at Oberon and say, okay, here's what we know today, right? We don't rule the world, so we can't get the answers overnight. But how can we keep moving forward? And that's where making multiple molecules that go into multiple sectors, because they each have different policy risk and different exposure to regulation in different geographies that they're going into. And so it enables us to diversify the risk, but keep moving forward.
Ammonia projects are also waiting for Treasury guidance. Jean Perarnaud is chief executive of planned ammonia producer 1008 Energy. He said both the 45V hydrogen tax credit and the 45Q carbon capture rule are critical for the sector.
If you don't get it, you can't make it work.
For green ammonia, he said 99% of projects need that funding to move forward. And he said 1008's planned Texas facility can barely make producing blue ammonia doable without the carbon capture tax credits. Blue ammonia, by the way, is made from fossil fuels, but its greenhouse gas footprint is reduced by using carbon capture. And 45V provides more breathing room as the company plans to make a smaller quantity of the green version of the fuel.
And I think that breathing room is necessary because what we've seen is obviously inflation has been kicking in quite a lot, and the capex that we were looking at 18 months ago are not the same as they are today. So I think if we want the industry actually to kickstart and function properly, I think being able to access 45V even for blue project is going to become more and more critical.
For some, Treasury has good reason to proceed with caution. Mark Brownstein is Senior Vice President of Energy Transition at the Environmental Defense Fund, and he told me that the fundamental challenge facing the Inflation Reduction Act is that, because it's a budget bill, the Treasury Department is responsible for implementing it.
So the U.S. Department of Treasury has to come up with the criteria by which it will now apply these tax credits. Well, the U.S. Department of Treasury is, equipped to do many things, but understanding the nuances of hydrogen production or biofuels production is not, in their core skill set. So they have had to reach out to, other branches of government, right? The Department of Energy, the Environmental Protection Agency, in some cases the Department of Transportation, in order to draw on the expertise that can best advise them as to how to structure their regulations. And that does take some time, one. And two, this is a lot of money that's on the table. Okay, these tax incentives are incredibly generous. And they're incredibly generous for a reason, right? They really are designed to help jumpstart the fuels and the options and the industries that are incredibly important for the U.S. economy to decarbonize. So it really is incumbent on Treasury to do their homework so that when we spend this money to subsidize these projects, we as American taxpayers are getting what we're paying for.
Many worry that the final Treasury guidance will take a conservative stance on producing green hydrogen from renewable electricity that could require producers to meet tight time restrictions. At stake is the gap, which could be brought down to just an hour between the generation of renewable electricity and the production of the green hydrogen from that power. And the guidance could require newly built renewable power generation. An executive at one fuel producer also complained that the draft guidance has geographical boundaries that hurt project economics by preventing, for example, the use of renewable energy in one region for hydrogen production in another. That creates the need to transport hydrogen instead of electricity. He explained that makes it more expensive to carry out a project that takes advantage of the funding. If a project gets a tax credit worth, say, $3 per kilogram of hydrogen, it might cost $2 to transport that fuel by pipeline, meaning it's effectively a $1 credit. All combined, the uncertainties could make things hard for startups that want to buy renewable energy off the grid to produce green hydrogen. That's according to Pollack of the Port of Corpus Christi. But the lack of clarity around when Treasury will issue the guidance has impacted projects that don't fit that model.
There are other projects where, projects that had the wherewithal to produce their own electrons, and still the temporal uncertainty around the guidance was enough for them to put their pencils down on projects that frankly, looked to us from the outside like they checked all the boxes. I mean, that's disappointing to see, right? These are some of the projects that we're going to help bring that marketplace to scale sooner, and the uncertainty around when those dollars will be available, when the final Treasury guidance will be out. I mean, I think we've heard from them, it has delayed almost every project by at least a year, and some of them just can't. That delay is not tenable.
Aviva Arendine, a Treasury official performing the duties of Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy, recently highlighted the Biden administration's progress in pushing forward the goals of the Inflation Reduction Act. And she said its goal is to finalize the guidance before the president's term ends in January. But what happens after Biden leaves? Fuel producers and shipping players point out that many clean fuel production projects are in Republican-controlled states, so the funding is likely to continue in some form, but it may change under either of the candidates for president. But that uncertainty may not stop all projects in their tracks. Pollack says the Port of Corpus Christi sees itself as a future landlord for green fuel export projects and a facilitator for infrastructure sharing, and he said the direction of policy in Washington favors producing electricity and hydrogen in the same location, and he said the economics of transporting the fuel by pipeline are looking better.
There's sort of a natural opportunity for the incumbent players in the incumbent energy space in tandem with renewable developers to build these fully integrated projects that are either aligned well with or impervious to, depending how you look at it, the 45E guidance. And so, it again favors the folks who are already really well established in the energy space in the Gulf Coast. So it's sort of doubling down on why the region is, among other attributes, why the region is uniquely suited to be kind of an anchor producer globally.
For more on sustainability and the business of the ocean, visit tradewindsnews.com/sustainability. And to sign up for the Green Seas newsletter, visit tinyurl.com/greenseas. Music for this episode is by Alex Grohl, Nestoruk, and Penguin Music from Pixabay, and Alexei Anisimov from TuneTech.